So I think some of you guys were a little confused about. So agile is sort of a process that different team uses, different projects. So like you said, like we see, there's other ones such as XP, Extreme. I don't know what those are, right? So there are different teams, right? It could be a constructions company or electrical engineering company or whatever may be the case, right? It's not just the software itself. But within the software, there are two frameworks that is heavily used. I mean, the main 90% is Scrum. So within Agile, Agile is a process. There's nothing hardcore about Agile, right? It's just someone came up with like, hey, these are the steps we should, if we follow these steps, we can manage the projects better, right? So you can kind of think of like a project management process, right? Just to kind of simplify it. And then within that, you have different type of frameworks that you have, right? But the one we care about is Scrum, right? So in your context, which one are you, from which line are you confused? Okay. Okay, so it's just saying like traditionally we used to follow step by step process, right? But this is more iterative, right? So when you go back to this diagram, that kind of illustrates that, right? So we build things in smaller chunks and then make release. Where in traditionally we used to build a bigger chunk, right, and then make release. But then it's harder to kind of do the change request, right? Because you're building a massive application and deploying it to the users, and now, it takes a longer time to get feedback. But even if you get feedback, it takes you just wasted so much money in the process, right? So with agile, it's more iterative, while in traditional, it's more step by step. To summarize that whole part of that paragraph, make sense? All right.
So what's the difference between SDLs and Agile?
Well, STLC is a high level processes that we have to follow, right? But within the agile, we are following the Scrum methodology of, like, SDLC didn't talk about product backlog or sprint planning, right? So it's all the ceremonies that you follow within SDLC. The approach that we are taking is agile Scrum.
Why are you teaching us Scrum amongst all the other ones?
Scrum is the most popular. That's kind of what the standard is. Any company you go, like, so even if someone uses, like, I think some places may use Kanban, but the whole idea is that you understand some processes, right? No one's gonna like make a decision if you don't know any other processes. So like you go to an interview and they're using Kanban and you say, hey, I use Scrum. That's not gonna be the deciding factor of hiring or not hiring you, right? Long as you understand one of those. And going forward in this course, right, there are gonna be certain things I'm just going to overlook a little bit because that's not gonna be the deciding factor of hiring you or not. The main deciding factor of hiring you or not is going to be your technical skill set. Even if you don't speak English, if you're a good programmer, a good engineer, you are going to get hired, right? So that's what you want to focus. When we get to like arrays and loops and this and that, you want to invest as much time you can possibly invest and then learn all of those, complex like algorithm stuff. So not that this is not important. I mean, this is highly important, but this is kind of the easier side of things, right? And learning, like going home and learning all the agile processes is not going to add a value to your resume. Long as you know one of those and you know how all the steps works, you know what, I'm happy with that. All right.
Can you explain me the pros and the cons? I didn't get
Pros and cons of what, the agile?
on the other, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the con goes, this is what we've been using. I mean, if you look at cons, like you're more under this microscope, right? So you have to, like, if you're kind of like a lazy individual, like it's not a good process for you, right? So I won't think about cons, but like I'll mostly talk about the pros on this. I mean, look, this is very simple to follow, simple to track, right? We are not building a massive application and then making a decisions. We are building iterative functions and then just smaller chunks of the app and deploying it and getting feedback, right? So in high level, it's easier to manage and easier to understand, easier to track the project, easier to see the feedback, all of those different things, or you can think of as a pro.
So pros is that a short name of anything else or like
What
when
do you
you
mean?
get like pros?
Pros means like something good about it, right? So, and then cons means like something maybe not an advantage. So advantage and disadvantage. So that's that.
Okay.
All right.
What do you mean by iterative?
iterative means like in a circle, right? Sorry?
Iterative means?
It's kind of like going in cycle, right? So cycle, like you can think of this is as an iterative process, right? So we're going within 1 to 4 weeks. Now these are English vocabularies, right? So those, if you don't understand, try to define it. And I understand for some of you guys, English is a second language, and this when we are learning this, there's gonna be a lot of terms that I use. Try to define them when you're home, right? Google it out, say, hey, define iteration, and I have no problem explaining them, but I think it's better you kind of prepare yourself that way, and then we can go over it, right? Okay, I think looks like everyone's kind of here, and we're gonna find out as a group how much we understood about Agile and STLC. So there's 2 links that I'm going to send you, and these are the quiz links, right? And these are multiple choices, and so there's nothing that. Oh, we're taking it here right now, man. So and they're random, so everyone's not gonna get the same order or things like that. So the questions are not that you would copy each other, but you know. I thought the future is there, so why not use it? I mean, like I said, end of the class, we are not getting A, B, C. The only way you justify your success is getting a job or not, right? So try to like do a lot of the independent work, and sometimes it's okay to ask your friend and things like that. But you know, more you do it yourself, the better it is, right? And you're also not competing against each other. There's a lot of jobs out there, so we should all help each other. But at the same time, if you're getting too much help from your friends, you know, tendency, you're gonna struggle toward the end, right? So it's not to make me happy; it's to make yourself like you know, with add more skills to it. So let's go over this. Where is this thing? So I'm going to share this in Slack, but also I'm going to have this in. So go to this site called join.quizzes.com, and once you get there, enter 253491. That will get you into the room. And once we are done with this, we'll do the second quiz, maybe before the break or something, or right after this one. So once everyone's here on the board, we can get started. No internet?
Yeah, internet's slow.
All right. So that's the reason to skip it?
Yeah, see? This past life's not working.
Oh my god. Then you told you out in internet sucks.
No, it's meant to
Just
be.
you?
YouTube is working. That's what you need.
All right. If it's really bad, we can do it maybe in the second half of the class. Because I don't.
Is yours working perfectly?
Yeah, mine's
You
looks
can
like.
connect to the network that you're using, the VIP Microsoft network.
No. I'm using the same one, which is Technosoft 1 GB, right? That's the one you guys signed up to. There's only one.
We have Technosoft, just Technosoft.
No, there's 1 GB 5G one. So
Yeah.
yeah, so Technosoft,
The same password.
it's the same password. So this is the one I'm signed up. Yeah. So if you, I don't know, so try this one and let's see if we can log in. Or you guys have bad computers. That's a, everyone who has Windows. If you can't log into internet, I don't care.
You don't like Windows, yeah?
No, I don't
And
like.
Android.
No, I like Android. I make Android apps. All right, see, I hear a lot of, huh? So make sure you enter your name, not the actual
Game
code.
code?
Okay, now it looks like people are coming.
Is it this one right here?
No.
No.
Wait. Join.quiz. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. And then enter the code here. It's 253491. All right. Looks like it's working now. Oh, so you guys were in the slow internet. Yeah. That was the slow one. You gotta be in 5G. Oh, can you please mute your speaker, everyone? It's your speaker.
Just have to wait for it.
No, just go to join that quizzes.
And this is just the waiting page, right?
Yeah, I'm just waiting on that. Once we start. Did everyone join here? Deepak, did everyone join from online? Good? Alright.
What is in Slack?
What?
The is it in Slack?
No. It's you just go to this site right here. Join.quiz.com. Yeah, I think almost everyone's almost joined. Anyone from class still needs to join?
Cool. One second.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, somebody's name is still 253491.
We'll just take them with numbers, I guess. Alright, I think one more person in. Everyone joined in class? Alright, that's it. Perfect. Oh, please everyone mute your, otherwise I'll put you to sleep. You get 60 seconds. So you're not graded kind of individually as a group. We just have to see as a group how we're doing. Guys, mute your. I saw this in my son's school, so I say, let me just get it here. So the last batch they did 72%. So we are still kind of on the 65% of understanding. All right, 14 people left. So if you got a specific question wrong, just kind of go back and you can review it yourself, right? You don't have to do it as it. So that way you can individually understand what what was the gap kind of thing. By the way, for coding, we're not going to use that. We're actually going to do it, and it's just for like multiple choice stuff. Some people didn't get started. Maybe I'll use. Anyone in class still taking it? All right. Okay. So I think this will stay with you. So make sure the ones you get wrong, review them and see the correct answer. So you can individually make the improvement where you're struggling. All right, let's do the other one now, real quick. So that was on Agile. And now we'll do the STLC one.
Is it automatically going to pop up?
Yeah. So it's a different code. So that way I can assess who's doing what where. So you do the same thing. Okay, 4 more people. Anyone in class still waiting to join? How about online? They all joined? 27? Alright, I'll get started. I think the rest can. Um, if anyone's still waiting to join, you can still use this code. So we're doing much better on this one than at
Huh?
huh?
The last class was 72%.
So 72?
That's what you said, right?
Yeah,
Last class was
yeah,
72%.
yeah. So you guys are still on the same. And they're doing really well now.
If you're 73, then you make progress.
Yeah.
Last class.
Usually it's the similar same pattern is always numbers. When you have a big batch, it's always always the number kind of becomes the same. But 72 is good. We just have to. Some of us has to just make some improvement. That's all. This doesn't mean anything. You do well in this or you don't do well doesn't mean It's just to kind of assess yourself. Okay, I need another review on this topic. That's all, right? You all are capable of doing this stuff. Um, anyway, we're just waiting for two more people. Let's see if they started. Okay, Helen. It's Helen, I guess. Helen and whoever 053. Imagine our names were just numeric. It would have been hard to remember.
That's such a good idea, though. Yeah, you might just get used to it.
Yeah, actually, that's true. It depends how many digits. All right, I think Helen. Don't feel under stress.
I think we should look at
We'll give her a few more minutes.
Hopefully, one plus this, plus this.
Yeah.
something like that.
I think did you log in or something? Or we'll figure it out. Yeah. You can see your own answer.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, just scroll down a little bit.
Yeah.
You're on the same page?
Because I don't have the same view as you guys.
I said plus one.
Past
Not this.
the agile
Plus
one?
yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. All right, this is the very tacky award program. All right, so I guess like this is not to kind of see who's doing good or bad. It's just like just self-assessment. If you got few answers wrong, that's totally fine. Just review them and go back and review those diagrams again, and that's fine. All right. With that, let's start on our newer topic. I know we talked about STLC, right? We talked about agile process, which was a lot, but today we're actually gonna do some work, right? So this is a cycle that is it's a responsibility of, again, we are trying to understand what QA is, what's your role, right? It's not just one thing. You will do a lot of stuff. So and it's stressful and it's a lot of responsibility. So I don't want you to underestimate what your role is, right? So first week, like I mentioned, that we're gonna just keep understanding what our role is, and by next class you should explain what your role is, what you do, right? And also, what today we are going to actually do writing some manual test cases, right? And once we write the manual test cases, the question is, how do you automate it? Well, that's when if you have to automate, you have to learn some sort of programming language, and that's when we start with Java, right? So you know the need for learning a language, and then we go from there. So software, just like STLC, which is the entire development life cycle, right? But now we're just going to focus on the testing phase, right? Because we don't really care about design and requirement when we are doing the testing stuff, right? So that they will have their own life cycle. Like let's say the implementation or coding phase, the developers, they will have their own life cycle of how they break down the requirement, design it, and whatnot, right? But within us, we also have to have our own life cycle, right? Some sort of a process. Otherwise, you're just going to be all over the place. Always think of like a website such as like Amazon.com or Chase.com. Imagine if there is no process. How do you keep track of all these requirements, right? And you deal with people's personal informations, payments, money involved, all of those different things, right? Just a quick bug that happened in production for our application. So there's an investor, and he had $2 million in his account, and he was missing 5,000 for some reason, right? And he got total like crazy and started calling and like. I'm like, first of all, if you have that kind of money, how do you know that 5,000 was missing, right? But I guess people track their account every day. So this kind of stuff can get bad raps and for the company and stuff like that. So software is very important. This is how people do everything these days, right? But to keep track of all of those requirements, right? So make sure that this doesn't happen again. So we need to have some sort of a process within our testing lifecycle, within our testing phase as well. So very first thing that we do. So we talk about what STLC is, right? So it stands for Software Testing Lifecycle. It's a sequence again. It'll be just like SDLC. STLC also has some sequence, right? It's a sequence of activity conducted to perform software testing, which executed in systematic and planned manner. Different activities are carried out to improve the quality of the product, right? STLC has following different phases. It's deliverable condition, but it's not mandatory to follow all phases. So not all phases are going to be a responsibility for you, right? You might be just working on one of those phases. So you see how your role is to keep shrinking and shrinking, right? You're not building the entire software. Well, then you say, okay, well, you're just testing it. Well, you're not testing everything, right? So if you just be good at what you do, there's an opportunity for you, right? Don't try to be good at everything because then it gets harder, right? You're just not going to be an expert at any of those, right? So that's kind of what we need to really focus. Yeah, well, I understand STLC. I also understand STLC, but my role is this. This is what I have to focus on. This is what I have to be really good at next 4 months, right? That's what I want you guys to kind of laser focus at. And then when we kind of help you with recipes and stuff, and then when people look at it, like, oh, well, he's going to or she's going to come in and solve this problem for me, right? So you started to add value to the company. So that's my goal for next couple of days, to make sure that you understand that, right? Then you have a purpose, you have a goal that you have to meet, and you can work toward that. So phases depend on the nature of the software or the product, time, resources allocated for testing, and the model of STLC. So there's obviously requirement analysis. You have to understand what the requirement is, what are we going to build, right? Test planning, how are you going to be. So this is a phase, and each phase we're going to talk about it in a little bit. And then you have test case development. This is where you write your test cases. This is where you plan how you're going to be testing it. And then once you figure that part out, you're going to figure out how, what are the test cases. And this is not something that is easy, right? I don't want you to take this lightly. Like I said, if you're working in finance, you have to know everything about finance, right? Even within finance, there's so much, right? If you are in regular banking industry, so you have to know anything about personal banking and stuff like that. If you're in investment, trading, those are the very complex ones, right? So you have to know everything about all those, risk management, fixed protocols, right? If you're from finance background, you have to know all of those stuff, right? And if you're into, like I say, if you're working for Boeing or something like that, you have to know everything about how airplane works, right? But we are kind of, when we read, we can understand, and that's why this reading documentation is very important, because that's the only way you learn those stuff. And then based on this, you set up the environment, and we'll talk about what I mean by environment later. And then once you have your environment set up, your test case is ready. Once the application is ready, it's deployed to you. Hey, it's ready to go. You start doing test executions, and if this passes, you do a test closure, right? So what test closure means like, okay, I'm good with these test cases, right? Let's go ahead, let's go into production, and that's pretty much it. So in reality, it doesn't never work that way. Like, so you keep coming back, it doesn't work. You reject the build. They have to fix something and whatnot. So those are kind of your daily responsibility, right? You get build, you test it, you find some bugs, you send it back to them, right? They fix it, they give you back again, and you test it again. And that's when a lot of automation is important, right? Imagine they make 3 fix in a day, right? How can you do this manually, right? So we have to automate some scripts that helps you. It helps you do testing, right? It doesn't replace you, it helps you. So I think there's another misconception out there. Oh, well, there is no job for manual testing. That's completely wrong, right? It's just that, it's a combination of some manual testing and automation testing, right? When we talked about like SME, like subject matter expert, if there is a person who really understands their domain, for example, like finance or trading or whatever may be the case of retail, there might be a manual testing, right? Because they understand the product so well, and your job would be to help them automate all of their tests. So you're kind of the software engineer in test, and they're kind of the QA analyst, so to speak. Does that make sense? right? So there's always a role both sides, right? So it's not like you're replacing manual testers, you're enhancing them, you're helping them, right? Because if that's the case, then like think of again, like so, something like Amazon, you would have more tester. If we were doing everything manual, we would have more testers than developers, and that can never be happened. Like the ratio has to be 1 to 2 or 1 to 3, right? There's 2 developers, there should be 1 tester because the company can just afford it, right? That's why automation is very important. So the very first phase, what does a QA do in requirement analysis, right? So during this phase, test team studies the requirements from a testing point of view to identify the testable requirements. So when we talked about initial stories, tickets, requirements, right? Once that gets established in backlog, make sure you read it, you study it, you understand that, what you have to do, right? And then the QA team may interact with various stakeholders like client, business analysts, technical lead, system architect to understand the requirement in detail. So let's say if the requirement doesn't make sense, set up a meeting with the business analyst team to find out what the requirement is about. Maybe give them some use cases, examples, and things of that nature. Also, you might meet with the dev lead, right? Whoever is kind of the tech lead, and say, hey, I don't understand how you're going to be building this. What kind of environment do I need? How can I create test data and stuff? We'll talk about test data a little bit later. But all of those questions, if it's technical questions regarding the requirement, you go to the engineering lead. If it's kind of just a requirement, the basic use case that you want to understand, you go to the business lead, whoever the business analyst is, right? Requirement could be either functional, so defining what the software must do, or non-functional, defining system performance or security availability. So it doesn't always have to be functional requirement. It could be like something like performance, right? But like I said, we don't really have to worry too much about performance security. Performance and security, it might be most of the time can be handled by another team, right? But most of the time, what our focus should be is like, what are the functional requirements, right? Identify types of tests to be performed. So we didn't talk about what type of tests that we have yet, right? This is kind of the second half of the class. We'll talk about different type of tests and we'll go over each one. But during this phase, you have to decide, okay, what kind of tests am I going to do? Positive tests, negative tests, kind of like boundary testing, like all of those different type of testing that we just talked about. We'll go over each one of those. So you decide those as well. Gather details about testing priorities and focus. So let's say you have a requirement. So you have 10 requirements. You can kind of rate them equally, right? So there's some high priority ones, the medium ones, the low ones. So you have to prioritize which requirement is the highest, right? Which one kind of stops the business. If this doesn't work, the business doesn't work, right? So if you think of Amazon, if FAQ doesn't work, it's okay. But if you cannot place an order, that business it doesn't, like, that's the whole point of retail business, right? Choose a product and place an order. So if you can choose a product, or if you can make a payment, or if you can place an order, these are kind of the highest priority. But if it's something like FAQ, or maybe even the order tracking number, right? I mean, you can still probably place an order, but you didn't get the tracking number. It's a very big bug, but it doesn't really stop their business, right? Things can still move. So you have to prioritize that. So that means you have to understand the business really well, right? If you hated studying, this job is not for you. You have to continue to study, right? In this job, you have to continue to read, understand, like really get into it, right? So it's fun if if you're interested to do those kind of stuff. Identify test environment details where testing is supposed to be carried out. So, where are you going to be testing this, right? What kind of server do you need, server configuration and stuff. And we'll talk about all of the environment stuff. So for now, just think of this as a place that you need to test this, right? When I mean by place, I mean some sort of a server, right? So those are the things we'll talk about later, what our test environment is. Automation feasibility analysis. So once you read the requirement, right, you have to kind of figure out, right, whoever's kind of analyzing the requirement, is this requirement, can it be automated, right? When we write the test cases, can this be automated? So you do the feasibility analysis, but it's not completely required, but you guys will have that skill set. So if you go back and read this requirement, you can actually, oh, this is fine, I can automate this. This is what I have to do, and blah, 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 right? So that's why automation skill is very important, right, at this level. All right. So that's kind of our first phase. We analyze the requirement, review and analyze, and that's pretty much. So when you're in an interview, we don't have to like go into every single details of how you analyze requirements, right? So you could just kind of say, hey, I know how to analyze and review requirements, and they might say, what are a few things you do, and then you can kind of just list for those stuff, right? And it can be in your own words. So don't try to memorize anything from here. Try to understand from lecture and then make it into your own words. So this is kind of a good example of how a requirement looks like, right? Like a user story. I like to call them stories because that's how these days people create them. And I have a real copy. For some reason, the image it's not clear. So you will get some stories like this, right? So this is in Jira. So let's think of, we don't know the applications, right? So what we are working with in this case is dark sky. So if we look at dark sky, so this is our application, right? This is our software. We want to add a new functionality to this software. Does that make sense? But since we want to add this new functionality, we still don't have it here. So you have to visualize it. Based on the requirement, you have to visualize how this is going to look like. Because you're going to have to write the test cases before the application is built. Make sense? Right? So I'm going to pretend like we don't have this application. You didn't get to see it, right? So now let's try to read this and see what are we trying to build. And if you have any questions, you ask me and we'll go from there. All right? So the title of this story is users should be able to view the weather in the past or future, right? So very first thing we need to do is that, okay, user can view the weather from past dates and also in future. Make sense? Right? So that's our goal. We don't know the design yet. We don't know how the workflow is going to work, right? And then we say, well, in description, guest or registered. So, okay, now we have to kind of take a step back. So you have a guest user or registered user should be able to view weather in the past or in the future by clicking the time machine button. So now we're getting a little bit more information. So we know that, okay, there's going to be some sort of a time machine button, right? A button named time machine. And once they hit that, right, then ideally it will be some sort of calendar pop up, right? Calendar will allow us to choose the date in the past or in the future, right? So, and these are the acceptance criteria, right? Like I said, this is a very simple requirement just to kind of get you guys on board. Usually these are very well detailed. Usually the business requirement, whoever writes, they're pretty well in writing. My skills are not up there, right? So first thing, you want to make sure the user should be able to view weather in the past, right? That's a must, right? That's the whole purpose of this thing. Users should be able to view weather in the future. Users should be able to view current day weather, right? So now, not just past and future, we also should be able to view the current day weather, right? So you can't assume anything, right? Everything must be written, everything must be detailed out, right? Like I said, when it comes to engineering, every detail matters, right? Otherwise, nothing's gonna work. Users should be able to navigate between dates, months, and year, right? So we can not just, hey, in the past, what do you mean by that? Well, I can navigate just by days, I can navigate by months, by year, right? So we know there's going to be a calendar, and within that calendar, some sort of arrow going right, left, whatnot, right? But we will get the design. We just got the requirement, but we'll get the design in a little bit, right? But usually you get the requirement first. Once the user selects the date, the app should navigate the user to a details page, right? So let's say when the user selects the date, then you should get all the details about the weather. Now, what we see in the details is not part of this requirement. It's not part of this story. We'll have another story for that, let's assume, right? So let's not go there. Our job is to make sure there should be a button called time machine. When we hit that time machine, I can navigate between days, months, or years. And when I select the day, then I should see the details of that that day's weather, right? Whatever the temperature was. Any questions on this? This is as real as it gets. Like I can simulate real life, but that's kind of how things happen. You don't get to see the requirement. You don't get to see the application at all because you're building it, right? So it only makes sense to put you in a position where this is how it is. Any questions? Any question on the requirement? So now, one second. I say any question, but then I'm stopping you. This is the phase in STLC, very first phase, you do requirement analysis, right? So you're trying to understand what's happening, right? And if you don't understand any of those parts, you either ask me or somebody else or whatnot, right?
For past and future, you have limit.
So that's good. That's a good question. He asked, between past and future, is there a limit, right? How far back can we go?
Yeah,
Well, let's assume no limits for now. Time is kind of infinite in that case. Well, in programming, a lot of the libraries only goes back up to 1970. So when we build out a lot of libraries, when programming kind of started, the very first time we started counting time from 1970 something, right? So if you ever get when we start dealing with dates, right, going forward, backward, or if you have to, we are going to end up building calendar at some point, right? And if you see 1970, that means your code is not working because it's setting back to the original dates, right? So that's kind of an error, but that's excellent question, right? That's a good business analysis kind of requirement he's asking. What else other gap or questions you may have based on this requirement?
You're missing a date.
Sorry?
Missing. What wrong date?
Well, that's your test cases, right? But just out of requirements, right? You can put dates because it's a calendar. You can only select.
Like your current location, where you are in the borough, state, country.
Good, because we didn't really choose the location, right? So let's assume this app reads your current location. Okay? But that's a good question. So we are doing requirement. You guys are excellent, right? So go ahead. Anyone in the front? You guys are quiet in the back. Okay. How about this side? Any questions? All right, that's fine. I don't have any questions, right? Because this is a perfect requirement. All right, so the next thing, this is kind of what you do in requirement analysis. And, we just have a few seconds. You're not going to have every question right away. So usually kind of take this, read, understand, and then add comments. So don't feel too bad if you didn't have any questions. Along with requirement, you get something called wireframes. Wireframe is like a workflow, right? You guys remember UX, user experience? What is it? What's a UX?
It's like an external experience.
Okay. One person, raise your hand. Go ahead, Malik.
UX is like an external experience, like layout, like the font, the color of.
No. Not, that's
The architecture.
okay. One person at a time.
User interaction.
User interaction, right? So, but that's 2 words is not enough for me. I need you to describe it for me.
Basically interacting with the user and understanding what is needed.
Okay.
How navigate.
How do you want your user to navigate through the app, so to speak, right? So you're right, but I want a little bit more details on your explanation, right? But that's good. So we want the user to first obviously go to darksky.net, right? So now you're getting a little bit more information about your requirements, right? First, you just got what you want your requirements to do. Now you'll attach this wireframe against the requirement, so you get more details and understanding. So we're getting more visual on it. So this is built by UX team, user experience team, not the user interface team, user experience team. Does that make sense? So user experience took that requirement and created this workflow, right? So engineering team will take this and make this workflow for them, all right? So what we want is, we want the user to navigate to darksky.net. Right after it, we want them to scroll down at the bottom of the page, right? Can you visualize this, right? So you can scroll down, and then we want them to click on time machine button, right? So we talked about requirement, talked about a time machine button. When the user clicks on time machine button, it should display the current month calendar, right? So current month should be displayed. So if I click on today, then it should display March. If I click on some dates in June, it should only display June. So you got to test this out. So this is a good use case to make sure. you do that. But from current month, you can click on time machine button, right? And app hides the calendar. So now this is very important, right? So when we clicked on time machine, it opened the calendar. But now if you click on the same button again, it will hide the calendar. Make sense? Right? Or you can select dates, right? And app displays the detail page when you select the date. Can you visualize this a little bit? Right? So that's how the requirement comes to you. First the text, followed by some wireframe, or you might get both of them at the same time, whatever may be the case, right? And so this is what's called wireframe. Again, this is a very simple one. Now, one thing we didn't mention is, make sure you need to test this for guest user, and you also need to test this for registered user. So you have to have a user that is not logged in, and then make sure they're able to perform this functionality. And you need to have a user that is logged in and also can perform this functionality. Make sense? And if any of those users cannot, then you open a bug.
So what the point to register?
What do you mean? So think of, sorry?
If there's any benefits for registering,
Think of like, again, going back to chase.com or amazon.com, right? Let's say you didn't log in and you can perform some functionalities, right? And then when you logged in, you can actually buy the product, right? Because your credit card and everything attached to it. So in this case, we have two types of users. Maybe in Dark Sky, if you log in, you can get more details about how the weather is in your area or stuff like that. But this functionality doesn't really matter for both users. It's same for both, but you have to tell the developer, who is this functionality for? Is it for someone who paid for the product, or is it for someone who's free? But we are saying it's for both. But you have to make sure that you test it for both, right? Because if we don't write the logic that it's the guest and register can use it, then it's going to kind of get broken and things like that. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Well, now it's the nice part, right? So now you get the UI design for it. So we talked about a time machine button. So we want our buttons to look like this. So this part is done by user interface team. So earlier part was kind of wireframe was built by user experience. So user interface kind of designs the button, how the color should be, what the font should be, and all that stuff, right? And then they also build a calendar for us, right? How the calendar should look like, and then the selected date should be highlighted in blue, right? So we just kind of take this copy and dump it into the code base, right? But designing easy, building it is a little bit harder, right? And then you have your details page, right? But we don't worry about the details page. That's a separate story that will take care of that functionality, all right? Any questions? So now you have visual, right? You have your requirements, you have your wireframe, and you have your design, right? So you can, even though you don't have the application, you can kind of work with writing test scenarios and stuff like that, right? Any questions? So we still don't have the application ready yet, right? So it's going to take some time. I think we reached 56 minutes, and I don't want to rush it as I get tired. So let's take a quick break, and then we'll resume back at 8:10 or something like that. All right?
Once again, where is it on the screen? Double screen? Okay. Hey, hello everyone. I will just take a few minutes. I already shared these documents, some kind of like little rules and regulation that we usually follow. And I will just go quickly over few of the like items, not all those things, just to make sure you understand those like all the point, and is not for like any hard and fast rule, but again, I mean, we created this thing so you want to make sure you become successful. So if you abide by some like policy what we maintain, that will really help you. So regarding the class and assignments, so we have two class and one lab session, right? So Saturday is the lab session. So a student must attend all the classes on the scheduled days, right? Because a student must participate in the lab session on a scheduled day and time is the lab session, and also assign the homework. For lab attendance, we will track your attendance record. So we have a sheet where we actually maintain who is coming, who not. So, and we see the percentage of your attendance. So 85% attendance is the threshold. They're like at least 85% attendance we expect, right? If you want to take any leave for any major reason like sick or anything, just let us know, email us, so that we can actually plan accordingly. So make sure you're not missing any class unless it is emergency, right? And also the lab session. Home assignment every week, there will be one homework, and it's mandatory to submit. If you don't understand when the homework is actually given here, just ask the teacher. I mean, if you don't understand anything, again, in the lab session, you can always work with the TS. If you don't understand anything about the homework or how to, they will guide you. They will not help you to do the homework. I mean, they will not do the homework for you, right? But they can guide you to solve, right? So homework submission is mandatory, and we also track that record. So why we track, I'm gonna come later, because based on that we do some scoring, and we assess the student at the end, like who will be eligible to go to the project work, who will be eligible to go to the job market, right? Okay. And we have a classwork. You will see the classwork, not every class, but there will be a classwork. So try to attend the class because you will be here. So participate in the classwork and try, as much as possible. We will conduct some quizzes, like now I think one already gone. So maybe it's random quiz. I mean, it's not like every week or every, there's no time frame. But let's say there will be 10 quiz, and at the end, we will take the top 5 score of your quiz, and we will average, and that will be added to the final score. So make sure most of the quiz you are participating and you are getting good numbers. So if you get less number in one quiz, maybe you can try for the next. So top 5 we will take into consideration. And there will be midterm exam, usually after 8 or 10 weeks. So that midterm exam will be based on your Java knowledge and some kind of like automation. I mean, that time we will also, already started the Selenium class, right? So in this midterm, we will track your, we will give you a score, and based on your score, the teacher will sit with you one-to-one and give you their feedback. And you can also discuss what is your strength and what is your weakness. You can always discuss with the teacher that time. That will be also added. Some other rules and regulation, you see, like usually we use Slack group. So let's say if you are coming late, just at least 15 minutes before, in the Slack group, main group, text to the teacher, hey, I will be late. Or if you are not coming, at least few hours before, in the Slack message. It's just, it's like courtesy, and teacher will know who is coming, who is not, right? And if somebody is late, then the teacher can actually track that. Okay. You can always text the teacher. If anything private in the Slack group. If something is common, you can actually use our main group. I think I don't need to actually go over those things. Those are, simple thing. Regarding the payment and cancellation. So, like most of you, I think there's a monthly payment plan. So let's say for any reason you want to drop out, just a week before the next payment, send us an email that I want to drop out for any reason. We can discuss, but just to avoid, because the payment will be deducted automatically from bank or your credit card, right? So we want to avoid that. If you want to change your credit card or bank like account information, normally credit card right now, because we take the bank account during the career support program. So if your credit card change, just let us know early, or email us those information, so that if the payment is declined, we can use the new one. You can also go to your system and you can change the credit card information once the payment is due. But before due, you cannot do that. And this is the final evaluation we will do. Like as I mentioned, the technical and conceptual knowledge skill, it will be 40% based on your overall performance in the class and other thing. For class participation rate, lecture hour and lab hour, that will be 15%. Home assignment 15%, quizzes 10%, and midterm 20%. Altogether, it is 100%. So to go to the career support program, at least 70% on an average you have to score. Then you are eligible to sign up for the career support. So the overall thing is that if you don't follow those things and you are not even 50% and you are coming, hey, I want to go to the career support is a separate program and is optional for you, right? So you are paying only for the training and all the terms and conditions related to the training, and you sign the agreement for that too. So for career support, we have some like eligibility criteria, and based on that you will be eligible. So I think everybody understand, and if you have any question, I can answer. Otherwise, right? Okay. Thank you, and good luck. It's just started. I hope how many actually are coming here for new career? I think 2 or everybody. Just as an because 2, 3, I think they have job. They don't need it, but it's still Okay. In all the class.
That was fun.
So much fun.
All right. I get this thing out of here. All right, let's get back to test planning, I guess, right? So we've got the design. We get into now. You have all of those 3 materials, right? You have the wireframe, you have the story, and you also have the design. So you need everything that you need. These are all of the materials that you're gonna get before the application comes to you. So you have to be prepared. So you have to do your test cases, test planning, all of that, and the application is ready. That's the easy part. You just do the testing, right? So if you ask me during manual process, what is the most difficult part is to visualize those things, right? Visualize, how can I write these test cases? How can I break this application? So your attitude kind of has to be toward breaking the application, right? Always looking for kind of a corner edge cases. How can I break this application? Make sense? So typically in this stage, senior QA manager. So usually test planning is something you don't have to completely worry about, right? And I'll mention why. Senior QA manager will determine effort and cost estimates for the project, and would prepare and finalize the test plan. In this phase, test strategy is also determined, right? So this is something honestly speaking, when we kind of starting a new project, right? Let's say we're working for XYZ company and we're going to build a new project to serve either our internal customer or external customer, whatever may be the case. So now we have to do some estimation, right? What are the resources that we need? So preparation for test plan documents, various types of testing, test tool selection, test effort estimation, resource planning, roles, responsibility, training requirements. So it's honestly it's something like this, right? So you kind of just fill out those stuff, but just again, chances are you're not going as a senior QA manager position, right? So you don't have to worry too much about it. But if you get into a position where you're the only QA in that team, so just kind of do this kind of stuff and decide what you need and sort of things, right? So I wouldn't worry too much about test planning. The whole purpose of Agile is less documentations so that you can work more incremental way, right? Because in the past we used to just create this massive documentation and nobody reads it, right? So you can create a 30-page test plan, but if it doesn't add value, what's the point, right? So rather just keep it within just one page. So this is the important part, right? Test case development, right? So in this test case, in this phase, you actually writing test case based on the story, the wireframe, the design, right? So now you have to start writing test cases. So this phase involves the creation, verification, and rework of test cases and test scripts, right? Now the difference between those, sometimes some people test scripts means it's a program, right? It's a code-based test cases, and test cases are mostly like just manual steps, so to speak. But that's again, either one can be different. Sometimes people just call everything test scripts, right? So don't pay too much attention to it. But if some guy wants to know, hey, what is the difference between those two? You can probably just say that, right? Test data. When we'll talk about test data later. Test data is identified, created, and reviewed, and then reworked as well. What are test data? So think of a payment system. You're building a payment system. And then when we are building a payment system, you need a credit card information, right? Without credit card, how can I test it? So here's the thing. Are you going to use your real credit card? No, right? So we have to mark this. So what we have to do is we have to maybe generate a script to every time you need to kind of have some fake credit card. So we'll just, on our test environment, we'll just create some fake credit card values and dump them into our database. So now it's going to behave like a real credit card. Make sense? So these are called test data. So you don't, so when you're paying something off that, and we can set some balance to that credit card, right? So when you're paying something, when you're purchasing, let's say you're testing Amazon, now when you're testing this out, it's going off that credit card. Does that make sense? So if there is a case where, if a credit card doesn't have the value, like, that you're purchasing, whatever it exceeds, then you should get specific type of message, right? How would you test that? So you have to have a credit card with, let's say, $5 and you're trying to purchase something with $10, then you should see a specific message. Make sense? So generating those test data is, I don't know if I have a slide, and maybe I do. If I don't, I'll try to create something. But this is kind of what test data is. Or let's say you're working on an application that checks your credit scores, right? So when you do credit scores, you need SSN ID, right? So when you have, how would you have this SSN ID? So we have to generate this in our test environment, not production environment, in our test environment, to make sure, dump bunch of SSN ID there and, share that with the team, like, hey, if you want to test this out, these are the SSN ID we should be using, right? So we can kind of like mark this whole process.
What do you mean by, like, you're creating a person, like a...
Yeah, like a fake SSN.
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
right. So you can just call, like, test data means like just creating fake data, so you can still test the functionality, right? So we need to kind of plan that into our database to pretend like it's a real data. Make sense? All right. So create test case automation script if applicable, right? So this is where maybe the automation team is working on creating automation script, right? So for you guys, most likely doing a lot of scripting here, okay? So you can actually, to be honest with you, a lot of my teams, before the application comes, you can actually start doing automation. And once the application comes, you can kind of just plug in everything you need, right? So but usually what happens is, in this stage, you are automating something from the last sprint. Because you already tested everything from last sprint, it's stable, it's in production, but now you're automating so that you don't have to manually test that again. Make sense? So automation is kind of always behind one sprint. Manual testing always in the current sprint, all right? So if you're kind of doing hybrid manual and automation, which is very hard because you have to kind of keep switching up, but if you're doing 50-50, then you might be doing some scripting here, you might be doing some manual testing. So these are your roles. Try to identify them, right? Or if you're kind of saying, hey, we need some help with manual testing, so you kind of just doing manual testing. Sometimes they might say, hey, we need some test data, right? Can you write some script to help me create this test data? You will have to create some test data. Again, you're an engineer, right? So you're gonna have to build all of those things. these are the responsibility of a QA engineer. It's not just say I go there and I do automation, right? There's a lot of other things you're helping. Now the test data that you generate, the entire team is gonna use it, right? There might be other cases where someone else, maybe from development team, when they were writing their test, right? When they were building the application, they may have already created some test data, so they might just share that with you as well. So, or if they had written a script that was running on development, now you can just run it on QA and it will generate those test data for you as well, right? So it totally depends on an environment and where you work, right? So it's not just one answer to this thing. But as long as you understand what test data is, you can figure out how to get it. Review and baseline test cases and scripts. Create test data. Like I said, we talked about test data. Test cases, this is what you're delivering here, test cases and scripts. And you're also delivering some test data, right? So let's go over. So I've created one scenario, and for homework, you guys have a lot to do. So I will share this doc after the class. So usually test case looks something like this. There are tools out there that you can use, like a plugin and things like that. Okay. So test case, obviously test case should have some sort of number, right? Usually you'll create, there's a tool called TestRel, right? I didn't purchase it because it costs money. But Excel is fine. As long as you understand the concept, it doesn't matter what tool it is, right? Same thing with like when we learn programming, as long as you understand things, you can code in any languages, right? So same thing, when we're doing it in Excel, it doesn't mean, it's the main thing is how you break down the requirement. That's where you add the value. It's not, again, that's not going to be the deciding factor of hiring you or not, right? Oh, if you know how to use TestRel, so what? You just know how to use the software, right? So there are tools like TestRel. There are also a bunch of plugins for Jira that people use, like Zephyr, X-Ray, and things like that. So if you hear those terms, that means they are just test case. Instead of using Excel, they're using some tool that has a pre-fill. Kind of like how we created Story, right, in Jira. So it has like a pre-fill stuff, but you have to pay for all that stuff. So test title and summary. Verify user is able to view whether from past dates. So this is, when you are writing test cases, very first thing you want to do is cover all the acceptance criteria scenario. Because if acceptance criteria is not working, and if they find this bug in production, that's a big problem for you, okay? Because we're not investing $500,000 on QA team a year and finding these bugs in production. Make sense? Because when they're making release notes, they're sending out to the entire users, right? And say, hey, we are going to have these features in this app in that date, right? So you make sure that first thing first, acceptance criteria is taken care of. But then if you have some edge cases, some weird users doing some other crappy things, right? And you run into a bug, that's fine. No one's gonna be like, yeah, that's the edge case. But now let's say if a user is not able to view whether from the past date, then what kind of testing did you do, right? So if you don't have some documentations, it's hard to remember the acceptance criteria of 20 stories from a sprint, right? So test case is very important. And this is the one that you are going to automate. So like everything that this is the story will be the first story we'll automate in our application, in our Selenium in 2 months, right? So just to understand that first we have to do it manually, and then we'll convert that into a code. And then you can kind of put some sort of steps, what the user should be doing. So you go to home page, you scroll down the page, click on time machine, click on left arrow button, and select the date. So if you click, so by default, you're on the current month, right? And if you hit the left arrow button, you can go back. So if you look at the design, there was a left arrow button, so you can kind of go back month and year or whatnot. These are your test data, right? So you should have some static test data. So I'm just saying, hey, you should have a yesterday date, last week date, last month date, last year date. So you should run this test case 4 times and make sure all of user can use all of those dates, right? So technically there's like 4 test cases here, right? So this is what's called data-driven test case, right? So what data-driven means is it's the same test case that needs to get run with different data sets. Make sense? Right? So, but if we didn't have any test data, that means it's just a single scenario. It doesn't require any data. We just want to make sure the functionality kind of just works. And one thing I missed here is I didn't include guest user or registered user. So there should be some sort of note somewhere that tells you, hey, this scenario should pass for both guest user and registered user. You guys can fix that for homework. Expected result should be header should display selected date from a calendar and correct temperature is displayed. So when you go into detail screen, right, make sure that current temperature is displayed as well as the header should just give you the date that you selected, all right? Actual result, it should be as expected of the expected result. So let's say I ran this test case, right? And the status is passed. And priority on this, I mean, it's not kind of the end of the world. Like the application does other things. It tells you current temperatures and all of those different things, right? That doesn't stop the complete business, but it is a very high functionality for this business, for Dark Sky. So you set that as a high, and you also do something called traceability metrics, right? TCM. So what that does is you see the requirement Jira ticket. So when we go back, where is this thing? Is this one? Okay. We need to make sure which ticket are we writing this test case against, right? So we are writing, you see, FA2-235. So now we have a traceability matrix, right? So let's say this bug happened in production for whatever weird reason. And someone comes to you and say, hey, you didn't test this, right? You're like, hey, wait a minute. Look, I had the full coverage here, right? And we can write, I mean, all of us are used to writing some Excel formula to make this into a pie chart and this and coverage and all that fun stuff. And then if there was a bug against this ticket, you will create a bug ticket. Make sense? So it's pretty simple. So for homework, you're going to write, I have it somewhere. We'll go over it later. But this is, you're going to write at least 10 to 15 scenarios to cover the entire requirements. Because I just went in one scenario, right? So make sure to cover the acceptance criteria and then make sure to figure out how many different ways you can break that requirement, all right? So during Saturday lab hours, if you're still confused, you can get Asan's and Deepak's help. But Saturday lab hours is also very important. They're gonna help you install Java and IntelliJ, right? So make sure you come on Saturday, because if you come on Monday and when we start with Java, you're not gonna have the software is ready for you, all right? And it takes a while to kind of get that thing working. All right, so that's that. Any questions here? Pretty straightforward, right? Easy stuff. But eventually we're going to automate this. Again, the goal, always remember, we are finding out what our role is, right? What your role is as a test engineer, right? So then when we are learning programming, you have some idea of what you need, why you're learning it, right? In the past, I wasn't doing this, right? And they're just learning coding, and all of a sudden I ask, do you know what your job is? And it's no idea, right? So it's kind of improvement from past classes and feedbacks, right? So I felt like this time it's better that we go over this stuff, as much as uncomfortable it's for me. But all right. Oh, this is a cool one, right? We talked about test environment setup, right? So this is what we set up the test environment. So we have the test cases, right? So where are you going to be doing your testing, right? So think of like car, right? I don't know, like Tesla or something. And they build this new algorithm to do auto driving or something like that. Can they just put it out in the market? No, so there has to be some testing. But where can they test it? Can they test it on, LA highways or something like that? No, so they have to build like a dummy highway, right? I mean, it's a real highway, but it may not be as crowded or trafficked as how. I mean, if you're from Los Angeles, you know how the traffic is there, right? So it may not be as that, but we need to simulate that, right? We also maybe need to simulate some traffic or some weather in Minnesota, right? So we need to maybe simulate some New York State cities, I don't know, like 6th Avenue or 5th Avenue during traffic time. So we have to have simulation of all those streets and then run that car there and see how it runs. Make sense? So same thing goes into software. We have to understand what our traffic is in these applications, right? So if we have like 100,000 users or million users, right? We have to have some sort of a simulation of production environment. It's not going to be exactly as the production environment because it's just going to be too costly, right? So we're going to have some simulation of a small sample of that production environment and have that created within our firewall, within our network. Think of like this Wi-Fi. Only you can access it when you log into this Wi-Fi, right? So we'll create that, and that's where you do your testing. And if it passes here, you know what? We're okay with it, right? That environment was tested enough to say that okay, if it passes here, chances are it's going to pass in production. So same thing when you're going to testing the car, Tesla car, it's the same thing as testing this one, right? But it costs, I mean, probably a little bit less, but at the same time, this stuff costs a lot of money, right? And where are they hosted? I mean, these days, they're pretty much hosted into cloud services, right? IBM Cloud, AWS Cloud, Google Cloud, whatever may be the case, right? But in the past, or some companies still hosted in their own buildings and stuff like that. These are just think of like a massive, powerful computers. That's all it is, right? But that's what kind of the test environment works. So test environment decides the software and hardware condition under which work product is tested, right? So test environment setup is one of the critical aspects of testing process, can be done in parallel with test case development stage. So usually this is pretty much built in the beginning of project before project starts, right? We're not really like messing around with this in every sprint, right? Every now and then, if there's a new feature kind of shows up, right? Oh, we need to do this AI type of crap, right? So now, let's say this environment is not capable of taking certain load. Okay, let's add some few servers and stuff like that. But you don't have to worry about that. Usually, DevOps team or networking team, they kind of figure that stuff out. Test team may not be right here, right? So test team may not be involved in this activity if the customer development team provides the test environment, in which cases the test team required to do readiness check, smoke testing of the foreign environment, I mean, of the given environment. So most likely environment is going to be given to you, but see, when you go into your first day job, they're going to talk about test environment, QA environment, right? So don't get like, so you're kind of used to it. And then you understand, hey, how is our QA environment is set up? Can you show me the architecture and things like that, right? So you get better understanding of how the environment is set up. So usually, you have developer will create sort of like a development project environment, right? So developer uses this environment. So they may have a user that may not work on your QA environment because QA uses different database, right? So, and don't worry about this Docker registry just yet. Once development is finished, they dump it to QA environment, right? Once it gets to the QA project environment, now you do your testing. So based off your test cases, now you're executing your test case here. So let's assume this application is built now, and they dump it to QA. We go here, and we click on the very first test case is to click on time machine, and make sure you hit back, and you select the date, right? And then you make sure that it's selected Tuesday, February 5th, and then show the temperature or whatever, right? So now you executed that test case in QA environment, right? Because they moved it to QA environment. Now this is passed, we are satisfied with this requirement testing, we'll move this to production environment. And as you can see, this one has developer has access here, test team has access here. Sometimes you have access in development. production, obviously users, all the users are accessing this. Also operation teams kind of monitoring it, like a support team, a maintenance team, right? They're continuing to monitor the production. And if there is some issue happens, they will also try to test it in development environment or QA environment to verify is this a real issue or not, right? Does this make sense to you guys? Right? So just think of like a three different system where one is for development, one's for QA, and one is for production where the end users kind of uses. All right. And this is where we kind of pretty much do the test execution, right? So during this phase, the tester will carry out the testing based on the test plan and the test cases prepared, right? So the bugs will be reported back to the development team for correction and retesting will be performed, right? So what happens in this test execution, so you have the development, right? And you see how it says V1040? This is like versions. Like when you get iOS version or Android version, right? Google or Apple sends you notifications, hey, you have to upgrade to 9.3 or 9.4, right? So same thing when we're doing development, we have some versions to keep track of. So we'll say, hey, they're working on version 1040 and they'll, let's say they say, hey, we made the commit, it goes to QA, QA is testing it. Let's say we found a bug, we send that 1040 back to development, they fix the bug, now the build becomes what? 1041, right? So we keep but this is not the build number that goes into production. Production may have a different count, like 1.0, 2.0, like more lower numbers, right? And then finally, when it gets to QA, if it passes, we sign off, goes to production, and then use in production. So you can think of three different buckets where we kind of work, and they're not related to each other, right? Right. So this is called what I googled that, and that's what Google says. What is a bug, right? It actually says software bug, right? Because if you just say what is a bug, you get a different definition. So during testing, you find defects, right? You either find defects or issues or bugs, right? Whatever you want to call it. But it's just a problem. The code is not doing what it's supposed to do, right? So that's what we are. And as soon as that happens, testing is the process of identifying defects where the defect is any variance between actual and expected results. So if it's not matching expected versus actual, then that means there is an issue, right? A mistake in coding is called error. An error found by a tester is called defect. Defect accepted by development team, then it is called a bug, right? So you don't have to go through all this flow. It's just either call it defect or bug. It doesn't matter, right? The bottom line is it's an issue that we found. And build does not meet the requirement, then it is a failure. And you can see this bug ticket, right? So if there's a bug, usually you create a Jira ticket for that. So similar to, let's see if I still have this open. So this is the software where you pretty much create the ticket for a bug. So then we can kind of link them what's happening. May I add to... You see where it says I hit the plus button, and right now it's a story. Story means it's a requirement, right? But when you're creating it, you can create a bug, right? And then you select as a bug and you say enable cascade, right? And I am the reporter, and you just put some descriptions, right? Steps to reproduce. So you kind of just go through what did you do to kind of, and then you list them. Right? Step 1, step 2, so forth, right? What exact step did you follow to create that ticket? Once you're kind of done with that, you prioritize it. Is it a high, medium, low, right? Again, if it stops the entire business, it's critical, right? If it's high, like without this, the user will be very upset, then it would be high, right? If it's something kind of like stays under the hood, something the user doesn't use every day, right? That something can be kind of medium or low, right? Um, and then you can kind of you can also link this to a specific story where the bug happened, right? So remember we had
And we can also attach the file.
yes. So you can also like take a screenshot of how the bug happened. Take the screenshot, drag and drop. I mean, these are basic stuff, right? You know,
Always
something that we don't have to
we
go
always,
crazy.
make the screenshot or
It depends, right? If it makes sense, like if you use a backend code or something like that, there's nothing to take screenshot on, right? But if it's a front end code, yes, I think you should take a screenshot. Some people just record the whole session and dump it, the videos there, right? So all of those possibilities are there, but you will create something like that. Again, when we do our final project, I'll give you access to this software. But for now, if you have to create a bug, just kind of simulate this and create an Excel columns and just dump the information. That's all that matters. Any questions? So if you find an issue, you'll create a ticket such as that. And this goes through this bug workflow. Like when you create this bug, how does it kind of get fixed, right? It's not like, hey, you create a bug and your buddy's working on dev team and you dump it to him. It's not like that, right? So you have to kind of go through a process. So anyone create a bug, right? It's not just the QA team. Developer might find a bug, they will create it. Product team can find a bug, they will create that. And also the design team may find some UI problem like a layout issues, they can also create the bug. So anyone can create a bug, and then you assign for review. So whoever like a defect coordinator, usually a product manager or most likely product manager will decide if this is a real bug or not, right? Because they have to confirm it that if it's maybe you misunderstood the requirement, right? Maybe this is what it's supposed to do, and you just didn't get it, so it's going to just reject that. But if it's a bug, it was assigned for review and then component maintainer, right? So component maintainer is very important. So that in that case, maybe a dev lead or someone who's looking into that. So when you think of again Amazon.com, you have team for everything, right? You have team for search, you have team for order management, you have team for payments, right? All of those different things. So where this bug happened, which team is responsible to fix this, right? So we'll assign it to that specific team. So it gets, in this case, it can be either be closed. This assigned for reviewer might say, you know what, this is not a real bug, I'm going to close this. Or we can postpone it for future release. Maybe this is a true bug, but we don't really need to fix it right now, okay?
next version.
Sorry?
Next version.
Maybe next sprint, I don't know, right? It's not a decision the QA or developer makes. It's a decision that made by whoever this person is. Usually, sometimes you can have the same person doing both roles. And then, if it's a true bug, it will be open. So status will be pretty much open. Again, this is kind of the workflow that, high level. But in the company, you might have something different, right? But in high level, there will be some sort of workflow like this. And it can also be duplicate. Maybe you opened a bug, but it is duplicate to somebody else opened something, and they're pretty much the same fix that will fix both bugs. We'll just duplicate this and close it, but link it to that existing one that is open. All right, and then we'll say unable to reproduce to be monitored. So yes, you found a bug, but you cannot reproduce it. When you tried it again, it's not happening, right? So you tried it 10 times, it's happening maybe 2 times, right? So you have to put that, okay, the bug is happening 2 out of 10 times or 3 out of 10 times or whatnot, right? So assignee for whoever the reviewer have to make a decision like, is it worth fixing this right now, right? I mean, it's happening, but it's not happening every time, right? So that's kind of what happens here. But when it's open, it fixed. So when it's fixed, and that's where developer kind of works on it, and you see like how it's pointing it to who's responsible for what, right? So fix, ready for retest. So once it's fixed, you have to retest this, right? Once you retest it, you make a decision. If it's fixed, you will close it. If it's not fixed, you'll reopen it, and it goes through this loop until it's fixed. Make sense? It's pretty straightforward stuff, right? So if you go to an interview and they ask you what is the bug flow, you might want to kind of explain this in a visual form. All right, so that's it about STLC. So now we understand what are kind of the test cases, right? Let me assign you guys the homework, and then we'll do a class exercise. What is Kyle is asking? Any questions? Any questions from online? Any questions from online, Deepak? What is it? Can she type it? Anybody else have questions from online? If your microphone is off, you can kind of just put it on the chat room.
Hello?
Yes. Hey,
Can you
Nirmal.
find sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, can you find the homework again?
Oh, the homework?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't go over it yet. I'm going to go over it now.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Thanks.
All right, you can mute. Okay, all right. So the homework is this. We'll put it on Slack. So homework will always be on Slack. So if you're not in Slack just yet, make sure you're on Slack. So homework is complete test scenario for Jira ticket FA2235 on Excel sheet. You know the Jira ticket that we went over? That's so I have only written one acceptance criteria scenario to make sure the pass date. So you have to write more to create the test scenario. So the question is, where would you do it, right? Well, the good news is you just have to go to Google Doc, create a sheet with your name, right, and just do the scenarios there. So we can kind of just review it in one place. Let me just open this real quick. Drive. So I'll give you all edit access there. So this is where we have all our materials, right? So we go manual testing. I will just give you direct links so you don't have to worry about this. Go documents, and you see we have a test case template here. What I would just pretty much still loading. Don't touch this one. It's just a simple condition to get this drop down and stuff like that working. Okay. So after first two, you can create another sheet here. You're gonna just do that and just put your name. Okay. So then we know. And if you go here, and then get used to copy pasting, and just dump this here, right? So you will have the first scenario, and then you'll start creating rest here. Make sense? Okay. So make sure create the sheet, and don't do it on somebody else's thing, or don't do it here, right? So anyhow, it's pretty simple. It's just to get the exercise going. So again, you will get a full purpose of why you have to learn programming, why you have to learn Selenium, right? If we don't do this, you're not going to understand why you're learning what you're learning, right? Okay, so that's that.
Can we do one as an example? Hopefully they'll help.
Then you're gonna make me work. All right, so we can do something like this, right? So let's say number 2, right? Verify user is able to view date, whatever, right?
That's all we're doing.
Yeah, so like first one, verify the past. Now it's doing the current day, right? It's the wrapper.
And this is due by lab or next Monday? Or this is upcoming Monday?
This is, it's better if you kind of finish it by lab, so you can kind of show them if you run into any issues. Right. Yes, of course. Because when I share this with you, you go there and you work on it, right? And then you follow the similar steps, right? So, but this one's steps is slightly different. So we'll copy this. I want you to feel the pain of this a little bit, so you understand why you have to code. Okay, that's the whole purpose of this. You might say, "Yo, why you just keep copying this stuff?" Well, if you don't automate it, this is how you're gonna have to work.
You go to format and text wrap.
Yeah, that's kind of wraps the whole text. Let me just click on time machine, because you're not clicking on 4 and 5, right? It's very important you do this exercise. I know it's easy a little bit, but that's fine. On time machine. Right? In this case, we don't need any test data. It's just current date, right? Whatever that current date is.
So you basically want us to create one scenario and then have the negatives and positives. Same
Yeah.
thing what you're doing right
Yeah, but I want you to create at least 15 to 20, something like that. Not just one. I want you to feel the
yeah.
pain, okay?
Yeah.
What if you get stuck after 10?
Well,
Look at another person.
you guys are giving me edge cases. Well,
We're looking at another
oh yeah, that's perfectly fine. Oh, yeah. No, you don't look at other person's stuff. And then yeah, you should see the same stuff here. The expected result looks the same, right? You do pass fail. In this case, we didn't test it yet, right? And then we'll copy this ticket number here. Okay, there is no bug here. If there is a bug, make sense?
Kind of. What do you mean pass and fail? How are we going to be able to tell that?
Well, you have to test
We're
that,
just okay.
right? So we're not testing yet. Let's assume
We're just gonna pretend.
we're gonna pretend.
Okay, because I'm like, what? I'm like,
No, we're not testing anything here right now.
Okay.
Just leave this. Leave this because this one we kind of did the whole example. That's why I had a pass. So let's assume we don't have the application ready yet. Okay, so you don't test it.
I have a question. So if we don't test it, how can we log it back?
You're not logging a bug right now. You're just creating test cases.
we're making.
Okay? No, we're not creating any bugs today. We're just creating test. So when it goes to the next page, this is the expected result. So you can kind of copy that, right? Sorry? Right, when you are actually testing it. But for this homework, you're not testing it. You're just creating the test cases, right? So let's assume the application is not ready yet. So I don't want you to go to dark sky and start testing this stuff out, right? For our next homework, you'll be testing it and creating some bugs and stuff like that. Yes, right. So you just have because you didn't test it, right? So there is no actual result, right? So if you were to test it and you say expected result did not meet, and you'll fail this, and you'll create a bug here in Jira. As soon as you create a bug, you'll give your ticket ID and you apply it here.
There are no negatives.
Right now, just meet the acceptance criteria and be creative. See how you can kind of fail it because we didn't go over all the testing types yet. So next class we'll cover all of that stuff. So you can have more homework on creating what kind of testing you have to perform and stuff. All right.
Is it possible to, for example, test it on apps like phone?
Yeah, but again, it doesn't matter if it's phone or web, right? The functional requirement is functional requirement. That has to happen. So even if you, let's say you open Dark Sky on your phone, right? That's totally fine.
Test case, right?
Right. So even if you open it on the phone, it still has to give you the current date or past date, right? So the functionality doesn't change. Again, going back to like Amazon or Chase thing, right? If you make an order and if you want to track your order, regardless you look at it in the phone or from a web, it will still be the same information, all right? Because we consume the same logic from the back end.
But also different browser.
Same thing. That's good though. This is called cross-browsing testing, right? You want to make sure the functionality works on all browser. But we don't want to go crazy on that because it's the reason for that is we're probably not going to run all test cases on all browser and all mobile devices because it will cost a lot of money in the company, right? So we're willing to take some risks, but at least you have to take the most used browser, which is Chrome. 72% people uses Chrome, right? And then make sure that all the functionality is working there, and then maybe subset of those functionalities will run in everywhere. Okay, but that's a good analogy. Like that's called cross-browsing testing. Are we good? All right. So let's do that for
One
home.
question. Can we get a clear picture of the Jira ticket
Uh,
in the
I'll look for a clear ticket on that one. Yes, or you could just guess what's.
no.
All right. Again, so this is perfectly fine if you don't understand few things. That's why you have the lab hours on Saturday. So if you don't do some work, you can't ask the right questions, right? So make sure you're doing some work next few days and then come to lab hours on Saturday. Okay, now we'll do like a quick, I guess, group exercise, and then we'll go over the answers. I mean, it's just a brainstorm exercise, right? So this is a very typical interview questions, right? Not with ATM, like it could be anything, right? Any type of a machine or software, right? So if you think of ATM, right, how would you test this? So let's say now you have some understanding of testing, right? I mean, you guys are pretty much a good manual tester in 2 classes, right? So how would you test this? Like we all use ATM, right? We don't check our balances, but we definitely test this out. Go ahead.
I guess insert card and we expect it to come full pin.
Okay.
We expect
So
it to
test
have
would
a
be
certain amount of digits.
Sorry.
We expect it to have a certain amount of digits.
All right. So let's take a step back. Let's take a step back. That's good, right? What are we looking for in this? So you have some UI, right? First, you have to have a UI, right? You have to have this is the level of explanation you have to do. Make sure it's plugged in, right? And then see that's what testers do. Like every single details matter. And if you don't get it right, that's not what we're trying to get out of this exercise. We're just trying to get out of understand of details that requires for programmers to understand, right? So you need to first make sure it's plugged in, obviously. Once it's plugged in, make sure you have the UI opened, right? Within the UI, the background of this UI should be like kind of like a mixed blue color or whatever may be the thing. So that's you're testing the UI, right? We'll get to the user experience a little bit later, right? And then once you have this, you're going to have some details like welcome to Chase or something like that. Please insert your card, right? So those are the things you're looking at. Otherwise, it could say, especially on Subway, this machine is out of service or it doesn't take bills or this and that, right? So you can get all those details out of there. And also top of this thing, it should tell you that it's an ATM, right? So that we're not trying to buy MetroCard from here, right? So these, I know it looks, but these are the level of details we have to go. When you're becoming an engineer, I promise you, like this, if you miss any of those things are just not gonna work, right? So I want you to get into this habit of building out requirements for something such as ATM, right? And then what we have is, I think this is a camera looking at you, right? So so this should be, so now you're looking at visual. You should have 4 left buttons, right? Should have 4 right buttons. We're not talking about functionality of them just yet, right? And then what we have is, this is kind of, I think this is a cart, right? I don't know. This is the receipts, right? Receipts comes out, so you should have some sort of an entry point for card, some sort of a receipt output, right? And then this camera either on and off or flashing, right? Whatever may be the case. And then you should have a keypad with all the numeric values, and then the decimal point, and then 0 zeros. You should have these 4 buttons here, right? So now you're just testing UI. See how much you had to test before you get to functionality, right? And then make sure these are colored based on the requirement, right? And then you have some sort of an output where you get your cash from there, right? When you are withdrawing cash. Make sense? So we're just at UI level. So now use your imagination to test the functionality, right? Well, first you insert a valid card, right? You insert a valid card. It prompts you to enter the PIN code, right? You enter your PIN. Let's say you enter an invalid PIN code. You should get a message saying, hey, please enter a valid PIN code, right? You try 3 times, it should lock your account. Something like that. So now, okay, that test scenario is gone. You enter a valid card again, a valid PIN again, and now it should display a different screen. And it should give you, hey, what do you want to do? Withdraw, deposit, right? Your check balance, right? So you based on the route you take, and that's the user experience that we are building for these users, right? So even think of something as ATM is very complex to build. It's not so simple, right? So those are the kind of brainstorming exercise I want you guys to do, right? You have to kind of do those things. And this is called, let me see if I have this. I had something ready for you guys. I'll cancel this. All right, let me open it. Okay, I'll Google this out for you. So we create something called, when we are testing ad hoc base, like a new application without any requirement. So let's say you went to a company and they don't have any type of documentation, they kind of just ad hoc build it, right? So how would you test something like that, right? Well, you create something called mind maps. You create something like this, right? So you start with ATM, and then you can say checking, deposit, withdraw, transfer, whatever may be the case. So your mind, you track your mind going different direction, and you start building these branches and trees, right? So it's very important you know how to build some mind maps. So for today's exercise, I want you to create that mind map, right? So not for ATM, but there is another one that I have, right? So do you guys understand the concept, what I'm trying to do? First, you build out the test cases for the UI, how it's supposed to look like for as far as the hardware goes. And then you figure out what is the functionality and workflow. But you don't have any requirements, right? So you have to build that mind map, right? And however you can design that mind map, right? And then go from there. But the exercise that we're going to do with is my favorite machine, which is this, right? So let's spend next half an hour, and you guys can work as a group if you want, right? I think let's work as a group, right? So you can get to know each other a little bit. So just turn, 5 of you guys can work, and then in the back, and then this you guys, and then.
We have a professor.
Oh, we have Professor Deepak. He doesn't help. He's actually very mean, so he doesn't help much. All right, so maybe you guys can kind of split the team somehow over here. Work it out. So just have a lead who's writing it, and then rest of you guys kind of brainstorm, and then we'll.
Writing is really good.
Oh, everybody online, can you do that, Deepak? Deepak, I don't see them.
I just installed it. Yes, we got. Click here. Yeah, I'll send it to you right now.
All right, I think they're gonna join soon. All right, so when you think of something like this, and like I said, now, yeah, obviously, maybe in real life you're not gonna have this. It's gonna be a software, right? So, how did you kind of break this into like different components, so to speak, right? So let's say you guys, right, Zahir, what was kind of the main factor? Kind of we looked into like, okay, this needs to work for this software, or combination of software and hardware must work. So how was kind of the mind map was designed?
We just mind map. There's like 40 things on it.
Oh, you just focus on mind maps, not the actual functionalities, or
No. We did functionality. We did a whole
okay. Well, like, what are the main functionality would you test in here?
functionality. Okay, so it then takes in money. Let's say it takes in money. Okay, so it checks. Let's say you put in a selection.
When you say okay, let's pause here on the money part, right?
So you put in money.
Dollars, credit card, Apple Pay, whatever.
So we
Right.
have money. We have coin. We
Right.
have cash. We have
Uh-huh.
card.
Okay.
Within the card, you could tap. You could slide. You could use a chip.
Right.
Okay. Coins, maybe it only accepts certain type of coin, maybe quarters and dollar bills or dollar coin. You know, the rest of it maybe, you know.
So that's a lot of good scenarios, right?
Cash, maybe only take dollars and fives. You know,
Right.
put it in 20s, spits it back out. I don't know.
Okay. All right. So that's good. But anybody else here on the same topic of money?
Of money, yeah, same.
Like-
We also spoke about like sound greetings and like being that it has the money has been accepted or not, as far as like green light, red light.
Usually they have lights.
Okay.
Sometimes
How much do you change?
Sorry.
How much do you change?
Okay.
Only in quarters or in
You need to go into the Zoom and
Oh. Okay. I see. So you're saying okay. Machines should, like, let's say you put $1, you bought something for 65 cents, you should get the 35 cents back, right? It's whatever the machines will kind of figure this out, right? Now, that's it. With any negative scenarios with money? These are,
Concert stuff?
sorry?
not sufficient funds.
So, like, let's say you
They just say if it's $2, you only put $1.
Remaining balance.
so it should tell you, like, hey, if you're selecting this item, then you have to put more money.
We even talked about, let's say you put in the money and you took too long to decide. What does it do? Does
Give
it
it
take your
back.
money or does it give it back?
Right. Okay, so that's good. Now, but what if you put, like, Zimbabwe currency? Right, so it shouldn't accept. So it should only accept U.S. dollar, right? Because you could buy a lot of stuff with Zimbabwe currency. So this is a good thing. This is a negative scenario, right? So you're putting like Canadian dollar or something like that, right? It shouldn't accept it, right? All right. So I think you guys kind of figured out what the money kind of side of. But whatever. Let's focus on anyone focused on selecting items. Okay, so let's see in that group over there. What do you guys do about selecting
There
items?
should be enough buttons for all the items. Like suppose I have 8 items, so I'm supposed to have 8 buttons to keep all of those.
I don't necessarily have to have 8 buttons. So like because we have I don't know, like 60 buttons. I mean, so we don't really have 60 buttons here,
It
right?
is by the number, like specific number for each of them.
Okay, so specific.
Number or letter.
The ones who
A1,
yeah.
A2, A3.
Yeah.
Okay, some sort of code that represents that slot, right? So you gotta explain it, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. We categorize it, you know, like A has like a row and a column. So A.
All right, kind of like Excel sheet, right? So you have the rows and columns, and then that way you're organizing that. And then, but how would you get this item kind of back out? Like, so dispense it to you.
Dispenser,
Yeah. So,
We put that in our visuals with like the monitor and keypad and everything else.
okay. So can you give me some scenarios between keypad to item? Like how do we link that, or how would you test that? So you have a keypad, right? And you enter certain values, and it should do something, right? So what do you guys test over there?
Like every item has a code on it. Like the fifth item is A5. So
Right.
you press A and 5, and you know, you put the currency in, and it drops out.
What if
Okay.
A5 doesn't have nothing?
Okay, so that's a good question, right?
Why
So
would you press A5 if there's nothing?
no. That's, hey, we have to think. We are. You can make a mistake, right? So let's. So that's a
Instead
good.
of B, I press A5.
Well, if it doesn't have anything, then machine will sound.
I'm not saying everything is empty.
A lot of
Just
machines
one
have like
slot.
photos, like an image on top of it, like a printer. So you press a button, and then there's nothing. They cannot see if there's literally there are no bottles. Like Coke machines these days are not transparent. They don't have a glass inside.
Right.
It just says Coca-Cola on top.
Right.
And they have these photos on it, and you press the button.
No, but let's focus on this machine.
It doesn't have it. We have to test it.
We're talking about this software, right?
But we have to test
Let her finish, guys. Let
We
her
have to
finish.
test it. Even if it's empty. we
Right.
have to
No,
test
no,
it
yes, that's
working
true.
or not.
Right? Because what if you hit A5 and it gives you something else, right? So it's a combination of software and hardware. So she has to test it, guys. Right? So
Then you just show the error message.
So it should say like.
it should say,
like
please
when
select
I-
an
the
other item.
or It's not available. Whatever.
Excellent, right? So that's a good use case. How about you guys? Related?
It should refund money if an item out of order.
That would be for money.
So that's a good case, right?
You put the money
Um, anyway, I think we are kind of. Anybody else wants to add anything else like you think is very crucial to this app? For online, can you post it on chat room and Deepak can represent you guys?
Maybe adding an option which disabled people can use it.
No, I don't want to add any more options. I want to just focus on what we have, right? That's for product management to do, all right?
Yeah, I'm just pointing it out.
I know, no, that's good, but we want to focus on what we have.
What counting how many it's held, how many items have, and if don't
The
have something,
inventory?
it's just the information.
So, what do you mean, like how many items does this machine has?
It's notes. You have 15 string,
Okay.
and when
As you're getting new, it's incrementing from the
Since the
value.
information,
Then it needs to be
Yeah.
filled.
Okay.
So because we testing like machine, there's hardware also important. Maybe the light is blinking, so like there's some electronics department.
Or
Okay.
functional
Right. No, it's a
working.
combination of hardware and software,
So
right?
the software might perfectly fine. It might take your money, but it won't just give you any item because it's blinking something like shortcut. You know?
Right. Yeah. No, hardware is important. Right.
What about if it's wrong number? You press, for example, A11, but there's no A11.
Right, so it's just an invalid key or something like that, right? So in this case, it's kind of like key value pair that we're building, right? Think of the Excel sheet. This is what you have here, and each boxes has some items in it, right? It's actually not that complex to build this, to be honest with you. Like, you know, a couple of us can get together for 2 weeks and get this done, right? Maybe not the hardware part, but like it's the software side of things. But ideally, like that's kind of what we are focusing on. Now, in this context, now let's take this analogy of mind maps, and I think you guys done an awesome job, right? Not the Scrum. So now, for your homework, you have something different. Hey, this UI looks good in this thing. I don't have to change the picture. Looks like it's picking up. So you see how we have the user story. So your tool for homework, it's not ATM or it's not vending machine. What you have is this user story combination with wireframe and combination of UI design, right? So that's your machine for the homework. So you have to take this and convert it into create a mind map, and that's how you can break down this requirement, right? So when you create a mind map, right? Create. So when you go into an interview, it's very easy now, right? So you say, hey, how did you break down a requirement? Well, I converted it into a mind map, right? And then in mind map, I had a one mind map that kind of, let my thought goes into only focuses on UI stuff or UX stuff, right? Another one just focuses on positive scenario. Another one just focuses on negative scenario. So now you can break down the requirement with some sort of structure and not just kind of vacuum in vacuum like you're thinking of what you have to do, right? So this is kind of your machine for the homework, and see, I want to see if you can break this down, and you will see you can write so many test scenarios, and don't worry about if you're writing it correct or incorrect, because the whole idea is I want you to feel that pain and then actually say, hey, what if I have to run this test case manually every day, right? Would that be feasible? And that's when we're going to start learning Java to solve that problem. All right. So for homework, that's the use case. But you have to come on Saturday. Deepak and Ahsan is going to help you install Java and IntelliJ. So all the installation, we try not to do it in class because it just takes too much time. So usually we'll continue to do that. And this is kind of the only software we need to do. The rest are pretty easy. But we'll continue to install software on Saturdays. And so make sure if you can get Mac, it'll be nice. If not, it's Deepak's problem. But other than that, any questions from online? Guys, let's give them a little bit of chance from online.
What time is it? 11, right?
Saturday, 11 o'clock. And for online, what time is it, Deepak? 9, right? So for online student, it's 9 o'clock. For in class, it's 11 o'clock.
11 to what time?
You can store as long as you want. Right? Just like don't